we're going to just give our attendees just a few more minutes in case they're having difficulty logging in to join us. So stay tuned. We'll be starting momentarily. Okay, it looks like we have some rapid activity with attendees flowing in, but to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sonia Gladwin. I am the Director of Corporate Training here at Anne Arundel Community College. I will be your host for the webinar today. Just want to take care of a few housekeeping components before we get started and I introduce our speaker today. You'll see on the top of your screen a few components. One says Interact and it has a little person above it. If you click on that Interact button, you'll have a few components that will drop down, and those are pieces that just let myself and our speaker, Patrick, know where you're at. And he may ask questions today, and you can go ahead and use these interactive tools. So you may raise your hand if you have a question. You answer yes or no with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if we need to speed up or slow down at any point in time, you can go ahead and use those buttons. So why don't we just test it out really quick? And if you'd like to just go ahead and raise your hand that you're hearing me okay, and that everyone is good to move forward. Oh, fantastic. Okay, and then to remove that, you can go back to the same place and just click the drop down and say, I am fine. And the other interactive tool that we'll have today is the chat feature, which many of you are probably already accustomed to. On the far left-hand corner of your screen, there's a chat box. You can go ahead and type information in there, questions or comments that you may have during the presentation. We may be able to stop and answer a question pertinent to the conversation, or I may just hold those questions until the end. We will have a Q&A at the end of this presentation. This presentation is also being recorded so that we can share it with attendees that may not be able to attend today. But we will cut it off at the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Anne Arundel Community College, for those of you that don't know, was established in 1961. It's a fully accredited public two-year institution accredited by the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. It offers associate's degree, certificates, and letters of recognition, and of course, corporate training through our department. We have three primary locations, Arnold, Glen Burnie, and Arundel Mills, for those of you that are local to the area. I know we have some folks across the country that are visiting us today, so welcome. But we do have 100+ additional sites, and of course we have a lot of online offerings. We currently serve nearly 47,000 students, which is typically a surprise to most folks. And a little trivia question, and you can use your chat box as a test. Does anyone know the number, the size of the college, where we're ranked in Maryland as far as the top colleges as far as population served? So are we first in number of population served in Maryland? Are we 10th? Are we 100th? Does anyone know the size of Anne Arundel Community College as it compares to other Maryland schools? No one is brave enough to gander a guess. Oh, first. No, Patrick, but that was a good guess. Nope, Sue, we are not third. So we have some heavy hitters in Maryland, remember. We have Hopkins. We have University of Maryland. Fourth? No, Frank, not fourth. We are 7th currently, which is pretty good comparative to the large colleges that we have here in the state. But thank you for playing. Okay, so now that we're all warmed up with our interactive features, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our keynote for today, Patrick Mish. He is the co-founder and CEO of Dementia Care Management, Inc. But I first met Patrick a few years ago when he was head of an organization known as MEdge, providing components for cell phones before it was cool, so all of the additional tools that we need for our cell phones. But Patrick is a street-proven entrepreneur with a passion for bringing big ideas to life by starting and building companies and unlocking full human potential. Patrick holds a PhD in aerospace engineering from Virginia Tech, and most recently he co-founded a healthcare software and services company laser-focused on improving care for dementia patients. Join me in welcoming Patrick. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sonia, yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for that excellent introduction. I appreciate it.
I'm going to turn the presentation over to you at this point.
Perfect. So, as Sonia mentioned, I'm going to speak to you guys sort of through the lens of my experience running MEdge Accessories, which is a company I founded in 2006 and ran for about 8 years, and many insights with regards to building a solid corporate culture were gained through that process. And so I'm going to share with you that experience from my perspective and some of the big kind of lessons that I learned, and sort of relay to you, like, here's some of the key things, and here are some ways you might go operationalize corporate culture building within your own companies, sort of regardless of your role and position within the organization. In terms of agenda, so, first we're going to kind of talk about who cares about corporate culture anyway. It is a bit of a buzzword at this point. What does it really mean? Why bother changing? What are the catalysts within your organization for making a change in your corporate culture? And then really we'll spend the meat of our time together looking at how to implement. And of course, Q&A, there's a Q&A session at the end. But again, this is meant to be sort of more of an informal discussion, so please, if you have a question, feel free to jump in and ask. And if I'm running too fast for you guys, don't hesitate to call me out on that as well. I'll be happy to take your feedback. So let's just start with a quick poll. Who does really care about culture anyway? And so within your organizations, I would welcome sort of some feedback around who you see with regards to the key players in your organization and their perception of culture and whether or not they care about it. And I think we're going to get a poll up. Yep, here we go. And so feel free to click on that and submit your insights.
So we have just a few more folks that need to chime in. We'll have the buttons you can push on beside any of the 4 options, and then the green submit button down at the bottom of the pop-up screen. And you'll just have a couple more seconds to vote, so get your votes in. Okay, it looks like we have most in, so we can go ahead and stop voting now, Patty.
Yeah, so I think if you look at this data, who really cares? 2/3 of the folks on this call are seeing all levels of management involved in really caring about corporate culture, and I think that the data that I'm going to show you guys on the next slide really supports that. And certainly employees seem to have a strong desire to have a solid corporate culture. So we can close this and proceed forward. So sort of as you guys indicate, there are really the management level, the C-level, in many organizations, at least the C-level claims to care about corporate culture. When you talk to CEOs and CFOs and you look at the studies that have been done, they certainly have a perception of understanding that corporate culture drives value within an organization. when you go out and you talk to the companies that sort of self-report with regards to their culture and say, hey, we have a good corporate culture, they tend to have higher earnings relative to their peer companies. So that's an interesting data point as well. And then, of course, this sort of bottom graph here, a table, is the Gallup data, which I continually find to be, just amazing that, only about a third of U.S. employees are really engaged in their work. And you've got nearly 20% of employees who are actively disengaged at work, who are sabotaging your efforts within your organizations. And so clearly, I think corporate culture is something that's going to have a big impact in terms of driving engagement for employees. So with that, let's just talk about what corporate culture is. Very much, you hear people say culture, culture, culture. In my mind, I distill culture down to 6 components. And I'm going to kind of take you through each one of these components over the course of the slide deck here. Really, though, when you look at it, depending on your organization, some of these can be more influential in sort of defining your culture than perhaps others. But I think together, collectively, the vision, the values, the habits that our people have, the way they behave, the type of people that we have in the organization, the sort of the story and narrative of the company, and our physical layout all play into contributing to the kind of corporate culture we want to have. So before we get into the meat here, here's just a snapshot of background on my situation. So I founded this company, Edge Accessories, back in 2006, and it was founded around e-readers, actually, when e-readers were a complete niche market. The Amazon Kindle actually hadn't even come out yet. But there was a device on the market made by Sony, and my wife and I are huge readers, and so, we got these devices, and we're like, this is totally cool. And we're like, we can make this reading experience much, much better. So we started designing leather cases for the e-reader device, and we designed a light that would integrate with the case and started selling those products on Amazon. And lo and behold, Amazon launches the first generation Kindle, and our accessories are sort of right there on the Amazon marketplace with the Kindle. And so our company very quickly starts to get some significant traction. And that picture in the upper right-hand corner is actually a photo in my garage. And so, we had this, classic garage sort of startup business where we had just a massive amount of demand that developed. And so these are temporary employees that we hired to just do shipping and receiving right outside of the garage. Well, the growth curve was very high. We sort of expanded our product offering beyond just e-reader accessories over time. And grew the business. We were number 91 on the Inc. 500. For those of you who are familiar with Inc. 500, they run a contest, but a survey every year, and sort of rank the fastest growing companies across the United States. So we were number 91 actually in 2012 on that list. So just massive amount of growth. Very, very, very exciting sort of opportunity. So, however, with a massive amount of growth comes a unique set of challenges and problems. So, why bother changing the corporate culture of your company? And so I think there can be, a variety of reasons of why you might want to address corporate culture. It may be that you've really got a disengaged workforce. It may be that you're not competing at the level that you want to compete relative to your competitors. Or it may be that, in our case, we were a startup business of 5 people who had, basically no startup experience, and we're trying to run this business, and we had, very, very limited infrastructure and sort of a not well-seasoned team. And so this plot here is, this blue line shows the revenue that we obtained in millions of dollars from 2009 to 2011, and you can see it's a very steep curve, and we were projecting out in the next year, 2012, to sort of continue this sustained high level of growth. And so, where we ended up was missing that target substantially. We were a bootstrap startup, so we hadn't gone out and raised capital. So our balance sheet, we didn't have lots of cash in the bank. So when we missed our revenue forecast, that was a fairly significant event for us. Also, this gray line is representative of the number of units of e-readers that were sold in each year, and you can see there's a nice growth curve there, but then it drops off from 2011 to 2012. And the reason for that drop-off is actually because the tablet came online, the iPad came into the marketplace, and that started to really steal sales from e-readers, and we were predominantly an e-reader company at that point. So, where does this wind up? Well, we had 3 good years of making money, and then boom, we get into 2012 and we're losing money, and a significant amount of money. Moreover, we were really staffed up. This orange line is our head count, which ties over to the axis on the right side. We were staffed up for a company that was going to be doing, significantly more revenue than we ended up doing in 2012. So this, our management team sat down, and this really became the catalyst for saying, hey, look, we're not a startup anymore. We need to get some experienced folks into the company. We need to refine our processes and the way we do things. We really need to take a look at who we are and what we want to be if we're going to survive in this, what was then beginning to be a really competitive market space. So our team sort of started with, let me just restart here. What I'm going to present to you is the 6 components of what I see as culture, and it's going to flow as a nice slide deck. In reality, in terms of operationalizing this kind of transformation, it's messy, and it takes a lot of time, and it's painful, and there are highs and lows. So, while I'll walk you through the next set of slides, and it's like, oh, this is no problem. Like, anybody can do this. Anybody can do it, but it really does take, it's a journey, and it's a journey that's going to have some highs and lows, without a doubt. Where our team started was, well, let's look at our vision here. And so in terms of defining the vision, I didn't really even have a good sense at that point, like, what does vision really mean? And so for me, when I don't understand something, I go out and read. And so I picked up one of Jim Collins. He's the guy who wrote Good to Great, among others. One of his first books is this book called Beyond Entrepreneurship, and he does a wonderful job inside of that book laying out, here are the components of a vision. And so he really lays it out in 3 pieces. It's a purpose, it's a mission, and it's your core values. And that purpose really is that guiding star that you and your organization are moving towards all the time. And it's, basically why you exist, and you're constantly trying to drive towards that star and get to it. You never actually get there, but it's in the sky. It's that North Star that gives you direction and heading, sort of, when you're amidst the storm. The mission is an interesting thing. I mean, that's kind of the mountain that's right in front of you. So in our particular situation, we were losing money in 2012, and so we had to turn the company around and start making money again. And so that was really, okay, how are we going to make this happen? And then the core values, to me, those are your guideposts, right? You want your team to be able to go out and execute and implement and not require a massive amount of oversight and micromanaging. And I think these values will give your team the ability to go out and know, okay, this move is in bounds, that move is out of bounds, kind of thing. And as you're climbing that mountain, you really need to know, in general terms, what's in bounds and out of bounds. So for MEdge, we as an executive team and we pulled in the employees as well, sort of worked on what does our vision look like. And so, we came up with this sort of Candyland-like graphic. But it's a visual that very much displayed, hey, where we are right now, it's black and white. There are a lot of scary things in the woods. We've got rickety bridges that we need to get over. We had a line of credit with the bank, and so, we had to be very mindful of that, meeting their terms and requirements. And so, however, as we navigate through this path, things are going to get better. And the path kind of represents the values of our journey, sort of that as we sort of plot up the mountain. And, as we get closer and closer and closer, things are going to start to get better. But we have some really scary things to get through. Ultimately, where we wanted to end up is a place where we had our products widely available in stores like Apple and AT&T, and Best Buy. At the time, I think we were selling in Walmart, Staples, et cetera. So we went from sort of developing our vision to moving to a process of looking at our values. And we had never been sort of explicit in terms of our values as a company. And so I went through the process of trying to figure out, well, how can we get more explicit? And sort of at the time, I think I was reading Tony Hsieh's book on delivering happiness, and he did a really nice job in that book, sort of developing the company's values. And sort of that spawned this activity around defining our values, and the process I used is very nicely outlined in this Harvard Business Review paper by Paul Hemp and Thomas Stewart. And it's a process that was deployed within IBM. And what they do is essentially go through 4 themes of questions with their employees. They get everyone inside of the company sort of involved in answering these questions. And so we did just that. And so the sort of first theme of questions really centers around company values. Okay, do they exist? You know, what's involved in establishing them? And what would a company look like that truly lived and believed its values? And so in our company, we actually took these questions, printed them out on pieces of paper, and then put them hung them up on a pushpin board. We had several very large pushpin boards in our kitchen, and gave our employees index cards and said, you guys answer these questions. Like, tell us what you think. And you can do it anonymously, or you can sign your name to the card, however you want to do it. But just hang the card back up so that other employees in the organization can kind of get a sense of what your thinking looks like. And so we had this, very analog sort of collaboration going on within the company. And we did this process, we ran this process over several weeks. And so, the first sort of phase was to look at these theme 1 questions, and then we kind of moved into the rest. I'm kind of curious at this point, to get a sense about your organizations and where things stand with regards to values and actions and what you're seeing. So we're going to run a quick poll, and I think we'll fire that up in a minute here. There we go. Curious to get your all's feedback on this question.
So again, just like the last poll, as you read through the options, just click on the radio button next to one of the 4 options and just hit submit on the poll voting green button. Patrick, as we collect the votes, I just have a quick question. Was that your face on Indiana Jones on the vision map for MEdge?
It was, yes. We had a very clever graphic designer at that time. A very clever sense of humor.
I loved it. You were in a flow. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we have most of our votes in.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll.
Close it, yeah. Really interesting. Our organization's values are reflected in our daily actions. I think 70% of this group feels that way. That is outstanding, and I think just a really great place to be. There are so many organizations that there's a large gap between what they state as their values and what their behavior looks like. So you guys clearly are well ahead of the curve. In our process, sort of the next step was sort of after getting some of these thought-provoking questions going, well, hey, let's take a look at the draft values. So what do people feel like are the essentials to MEdge and what we need to become? And so sort of we continue to use this process of index cards on a pushpin board. And so that sort of got served as our first draft. And then, okay, well, let's ask a few more questions here. If our company disappeared tomorrow or tonight, how would we be, what would be different in the world tomorrow? just sort of asking these questions. When you ask yourself those kind of questions, it's really interesting, the answers that begin to, or maybe don't begin to sort of spring to mind. And so then sort of this last phase that we went through was, what does the gold standard look like for Edge? When are we at our best? And I think, there's so much insight to be gleaned from when an organization is at its best. And we certainly had a lot of moments where we were able to sort of overcome what seemed like insurmountable situations as we launched products. And so, we learned a lot by asking these questions, and we wrapped up the process by sort of putting together a second draft of values and then going back to the employees and say, here's what we're thinking, what do you guys think? And sort of very openly and candidly having those discussions. Where we ended up with is 10 values, and this poster is one of the many posters that we had hanging in our office that articulates those values. In retrospect, from my perspective, I think 10 values is maybe a little bit too many. It's hard for everyone and your people to remember all this information. I think it forces you to think a little more deeply if you work to narrow it. And then there's a kind of an interesting quote from one of the Edge employees that I stuck down there at the bottom as well. So moving from values to habits and people, I'm going to combine this basically into one slide. In our situation, after we defined our values and we had a good sense of our vision, we started to look first at our executive team. And it was very evident that we had some gaps in our team in terms of the behaviors that were exhibited within the organization and what we felt the organization needed to be from a values perspective. So we were very upfront about asking the leadership team to step up and work on some behavior modifications. That's a tough process. It's for people to change. For many people to change, it can be a very challenging process. So we actually brought in a coach, an executive coach, to work with our team, and ultimately that led to us hiring some new folks, moving some people around, and then actually getting rid of some folks as well. But we were really committed to doing this right. We also recognize within the organization, as a younger company, some of these basic skills around crucial conversations, sort of these high-stakes conversations, were missing from some of our employees. So myself and the leader who ran HR for our company went out and got trained in this. Some of you may be familiar with the book Crucial Conversations. And we brought that information and know-how back to the organization and started to train our people around crucial conversations, kind of help them break down some of the barriers that occur when you've got to have tough conversations, which you've got to have tough conversations to be successful. And then also 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and we just think that's a great sort of baseline set of strategies. So we did a lot of training related to that. And then down in the lower right-hand corner, we presented to our people very regularly with, okay, here's our plan, here's what we're thinking, give us your feedback. We would hold these quarterly updates with the whole company and be very transparent from a financial aspect all the way through. And then sort of we rounded it out with, hey, let's start to really track and monitor our employee engagement. And we used this happiness at work survey, which is excellent. I can't recommend it highly enough, survey for looking at employee engagement. And so that process, we really were able to pull in employees who maybe were straddling the fence, and those that didn't kind of want to come along on the journey, we worked with to, in one form or fashion, if we couldn't get them into another location in the company or another position, we worked with them to exit the business in one way or another. Some of those were more painful than others, but you do what you have to do. So that was sort of the first 4 pieces of our journey. The next piece was really the narrative. And so the narrative in my mind is really, what is the story of, in our case, our company, right? What is the story of the organization? And all companies have their stories. They have their times when they were able to achieve greatness in the face of extremely challenging situations. And, for us, we were a startup, so we had a really cool startup story, and then we did a lot of things very, very quickly and nimbly that competitors of ours couldn't do. And so that began to form the basis of our company narrative, which I put into a document called the M-Edge Core Ideology, and it sort of picked up those stories, the sort of tribal stories, and then what we talked about, the vision, the values, the behaviors, the habits, the way that we want to do things. So, the last piece here is with regards to place. And place can or cannot, in my mind, be a big deal. And so at M-Edge, this is looking at the back of our office space. It was a mixed-use office space, so we had warehouse space and some front office. It was old and grungy and nothing fancy at all. And I love the fact that that's what it was, because it really kept folks grounded in reality. Like, life is hard right now, and we're not going to go, live in a, $30 per square foot location where you have mahogany desks. We need to get back to making money, and part of that is, dealing with the environment that we're in. That said, I think, if you look at, I think the great example is Pixar in terms of how they designed that office to facilitate collaboration, that sort of circular design. The bathrooms were in the middle or at the center. So, if you're on the periphery, you've got to walk in to that center area. And that, for Pixar, collaboration was really key to driving their success. So they align their physical space with that objective, which I think is very, 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 very smart thing to do and makes a lot of sense. So from an outcomes perspective, for us, the outcomes were sort of mixed. We won 2 top workplace awards in 2011 and 2012, and we won the award in 2012 actually while we were going through a couple rounds of layoffs. So, layoffs can be extremely painful, but we were very diligent in sort of how we worked with folks to get that done, and very open and transparent. And so I really think that the award in 2012 was particularly meaningful for us in sort of light of that situation. Ultimately, we ended up selling the business in 2014. The folks that bought the business kept the full team in place. That no one was let go, and the company continues to thrive today. So, of course, as I mentioned, it's never that easy and clean to execute all of this, right? This is a 12 to 24 month process that has its ups and downs. So let's look at some of the common barriers. In my experience with our team, it's, why do we need to change? Like, things are going to get better. People talk themselves into believing things will change for the better in spite of actually taking action. And so we heard that quite a bit out of some folks on our team. And ultimately, I think you sort of peel back the layers there. And fear tends to be the predominant driver in changing corporate culture. People like the status quo. They know what they're showing up to at work every day. And when you start to take them through this change process, the transition period is extremely uncomfortable for them. So really working to address that fear, and our strategy was to be very open and transparent and let people know that this is part of an objective to get the business back to where it needs to be. So in the chat box, it would be interesting to hear your perspectives with regards to the challenges and barriers you're seeing in establishing cultures at your organizations.
So if anyone has any comments, you can go ahead and use the chat feature to share some of the challenges you faced or are currently facing as it pertains to culture. We haven't primed them up, Patrick, to be ready for questions, maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe there are no barriers. Excellent. So we can skip over that one. I love it. With regards to actions you can take right now, I am a huge fan of, being the change you want to see. So, regardless of where you are in the organization, I happen to be the CEO of MEdge, but I still had a leadership team. I still had co-founders, and I couldn't necessarily just get rid of folks that easily, even if I wanted to. So ultimately, what I learned is, okay, if I expect people to behave a certain way, then I need to behave the way that I expect them to. So, for example, if people are behaving within the organization passive aggressively, and I don't want that happening, then I sure as heck better not be behaving passive aggressively. So that, to me, is like step one, like be the change you want. The next thing is, I love the concept of the 1% solution. What is the step that I can take, the one step that I can take today to begin to move the organization to where I want it to be in the future? And so, depending on where you are in your organization, that might be as simple as saying, I want to get a meeting with, whoever it is in our company who can influence the culture development process and sit down and talk to them about, my views, my opinions on that. Additionally, there is, your own team. For those of you that have folks that work with you, that work for you, you can certainly sort of go through this process with your own team, kind of in the context of the overarching framework of your organization, and be the culture that will help your team, implement that culture that will help your team succeed in your objectives.
Patrick, we did have a comment from Valerie saying it becomes more difficult to unite people when there's an extreme variance in motivations, backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that gets to sort of what's the underlying purpose for the organization. Do the folks that are sort of a part of that team, do they connect with the organization's underlying purpose? I mean, to me, that's, you've got to have folks motivated around doing something that they're passionate about. And when you're able to connect that passion to purpose, I think you get the sort of best engagement.
And Patrick, just one other comment, the fear component that you just touched on, there's some balance that has to happen, or imbalance, I guess, between where people are with fear and what level of pain they're feeling. Do you find that in MEdge's case that was the catalyst, is that the pain component overtook the fear?
Yeah, some people are willing to they have their initial fears, but when they have some understanding of, okay, like I understand how this is going to begin to impact my sphere, my world, then that anxiety level comes down significantly. For people who really don't want to change, then it can get to a point where it becomes very painful for them, and then either they capitulate and say, you know what, I'll get on board the bus, or they might leave the organization depending on the level of pain. Certainly, if you've got good, talented people, you don't necessarily want them to be in a situation where they're living in a world of pain, but you do need people to transition their thinking and their behaviors and their beliefs to support what the organization needs, and that process can be painful, but you can't leave them in it forever. You gotta walk them through the forest and get them to the other side, and put strategies in place that are going to hopefully bridge that journey for most people.
Great.
So in terms of next steps, one action you'll take to build or sustain a culture that engages employees and improves your organization's performance. Would love to hear it if you want to share it on the chat, or if nothing else, it's something for you to think about as you move down the road. And I do have a closing thought on signs that your culture maybe is not what you want it to be, and hopefully the video will run here. Let's see. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And if there are any thoughts or questions, we welcome the opportunity to talk further.
So if there were any problems that occurred, there may be some situations with your functionality of the computer that you're working from. The network may have blocked it. I went ahead and posted the link to the video. It's there in the chat feature. If you have questions, go ahead and think about them and post them now. One question that we've already gotten, and I responded earlier, that this is being recorded. You will receive the recording and the slides just by signing up today. So we will have that information out to you as soon as we finish up today and the information compiles. But if you have a question, if you'd like to go ahead and use the chat feature now, we'll have Patrick go ahead and address any comments or questions that you have.